Hey guys, so you've been talking about propagation in class, and I thought this was a good opportunity to talk about plant hormones. So I've got a definition up here of hormone for you. A hormone is a chemical that's produced somewhere in the body that either works locally, in other words, in a specific group of cells nearby, or it might work in another part of the body to stimulate a cell into action. So it forces cells to do stuff, whatever that stuff is that they're supposed to do. So that's the purpose of a hormone. Now what's important to understand is that plant cells, or plants, don't have a nervous system. So because there's no brain to control the activity of plants, all the activities of plants are controlled by some hormones. And I'm going to go through a few of these hormones with you today. Understand there's a bunch of hormones for plants, so don't get confused and think that these are the only hormones there are for plants. And also, I'm not going to go into every function of all of these hormones because these hormones actually often have multiple functions. Okay, so the first group of hormones we're going to talk about is auxins versus cytokinins. And there are two groups here. The picture here highlights, the picture on the left highlights auxins. This picture shows you what happens with cytokinins or with just auxins. And so these are the growth hormones for plants. So auxins and cytokinins are both about growth. Now, anybody who's ever done a garden or grown any plants before knows there's two ways that plants can grow. Plants can grow up or they can grow out. So auxins are the up hormone. Okay, so auxin is all about growing up. So if you want a plant to get really tall, what happens is you give it auxin. Auxin accumulates in the tip of the stem, and that tip of the stem is called a meristem. And when auxin accumulates in the tip of the stem, it causes upward growth. That's just its main function. Auxin will also occur at the tip of the roots as well, so it'll cause the roots to grow down into the soil. So this is about elongation, in other words, making either the stem or the root system longer. Cytokinins are different. Notice this plant here that's been treated with the cytokinins. Notice this plant is getting bushy, and that's because cytokinins promote side-to-side growth. Now, there's always this battle going on in plants between the auxin hormone and the cytokinin hormones. What plants exhibit is something called apical dominance. In other words, the end meristems, like the ones you're seeing here, are dominant. The plant is trying to shoot upward, trying to grow upward, and that's what it tries to do pretty much every single time. However, notice that as you look at this picture, the concentration as you move down the stem, concentration of that auxin gets less and less. So as you move further down the stem, the lateral meristems, the sideways meristems, which produce cytokinin, can take over, and you can get a plant that gets a little bit bushier. And you might have experienced this before. If you've ever tried to grow lettuce, you may have heard, you think, oh, I'm going to get a nice big head of iceberg lettuce in my garden. And then you go out a few days later and you get this long, leggy plant. And that's because of this apical dominance. What they don't tell you is you've got to pinch this meristem off. You've got to actually go out and pinch the tip of the stem off in order for the auxin to not be dominant, so that the plant produces sideways growth and makes that tight little head. So cytokinins are about side to side, auxin is about up and down. Something else that auxin is responsible for, it's kind of cool, is something called phototropism, and that's what this picture is here. And what you're seeing is the auxin starts to accumulate on this side of the stem. So if you've ever grown a plant in a window in the wintertime, like you bring your plants in, sit it in the window, if you don't turn that plant periodically and you just let it grow, you'll notice the stem will start to grow toward the light, grow toward the window, and that's because of auxin as well. The auxin is accumulating on this dark side of the stem, which is causing the cells on that side to grow just slightly longer than the cells on the light side over here, which means the stem starts to bend. So that's auxin is responsible for that. Okay, the next category is called the Gibbsellins. And the Gibbsellins are kind of funny because they do a lot of things. They're a growth hormone, but you can kind of think of them as the baby growth hormone. You'll see here, this is a picture of a seedling coming out of the seed. So you've got the little baby plant here, 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 and then you'll notice it's starting to grow. Okay, so that's gibberellins are responsible for that, and it gets produced in the seed. Also, gibberellins are used in horticulture to do a couple things. So in this top row of pictures that you see here is minus the gibberellic acid, minus gibberellins. This bottom row shows you what happens when you add gibberellin to the plants, and notice you get fewer flowers if you add gibberellin to the plant. So they don't produce as many flowers, but look at the size of the fruit here compared to here, and here compared to down here. You'll notice when you have gibberellins, the plant produces a much larger fruit. So in horticulture, that's kind of a big deal. If you want a nice big apple, you treat your apples with gibberellin, you treat your plant with gibberellin to try to get it to produce nice big apples for people. Okay, another hormone, this one's kind of the dominant hormone that can shut all hormones down, and that's abscisic acid. Abscission is the process by which plants drop their leaves in the fall. Okay, so abscisic hormone is a hormone that's capable of shutting down the effects of all other hormones. So if it gets to be a little bit toward fall and the plant tries to flower, abscisic acid gets produced, and the abscisic acid is going to shut down all those flowering hormones that the plant wants to try to produce. It will also turn off auxin and cytokinins and gibberellins. It'll turn off all of those and force the plant into a dormant state for the winter time. And so what I put here as the picture here is, notice the abscisic acid is what's responsible for the fading of the chlorophyll in the fall, and that's why all those secondary pigments in the plants come out. Finally, another interesting plant hormone is ethylene. And ethylene is interesting because it's a fruit hormone. It's produced in fruits. The reason why I say that's interesting is if I cut off your finger's done at that point. Unless we reattach it, your finger's not going to continue to do what fingers do. But plants are a little bit different. Plants actually have the ability for you to take pieces of them off and they can still survive, and that's because those plant parts are still capable of producing hormones. The same is true for fruits. Alright, so fruits produce this ethylene. Now, ethylene is a clear, odorless gas. And the more ripe the fruit is, the more ethylene it produces. The more ethylene it produces, the more it's going to ripen the fruit. So everybody knows when you get your bananas, you take your bananas home from the store, they might look like this or this, right? Or actually most of us probably buy them here thinking, well, it's going to last a few days. But what happens is, if you don't keep those bananas separated from one another, they start to produce ethylene. And that ethylene gas very quickly ripens the fruit and over-ripens the fruit. Now, a few fruits actually produce a lot of ethylene. Bananas, of course, and apples produce a lot of ethylene. This is also why if you ever buy pears in the wintertime and they're kind of hard when you bring them home from the grocery store, they tell you to put them in a paper bag with a banana or an apple for a day or two, and you just kind of seal the top of the bag. And the banana or the apple will start to produce ethylene, which will ripen the pears for you. This is also why if you say you have a banana that you put in your lunchbox that looks like this in the morning, by the time you open up that lunchbox at lunchtime, if you haven't vented this ethylene gas that the banana is producing, you'll open your lunchbox at noon and you'll find that your banana is all spotty. And another application of this is, I don't know if you've seen those green bags on TV, but the green bags are supposed to vent ethylene, which allows the fruits to stay fresher inside. Now, why are we going into all this? Again, the name of the game here is hormones. Hormones regulate plants, and you guys have been talking about propagation. Propagation works best when you provide the plants with hormones. So if, for example, you take a plant cutting and you dip that cutting in a little bit of root tone, what you're dipping it in is a mixture of hormones like auxins and cytokinins and things like that that will actually accelerate the growth of the plant a little bit, cause the plant to very quickly produce roots and root itself. So you can actually propagate plants a little bit better when you use hormones like that root tone that you've used. Again, kind of a strange feature of plants, we can cut pieces of them off and they can continue to survive just because of the hormones. But at any rate, it's kind of interesting. These plant hormones pretty much act like the plant nervous system and control all the things in plants.